something where drivers are constantly changing carriers because they're never happy. you know, well, I give you that. Not everybody's happy, but you know, it's something like, for 5 cents per mile, you're going to change carriers. It's like, okay, well, is money the only thing that's motivating you? Because for some people, it is. I don't know what their situation is, but evidently they're on so much financial stress or pressure that they feel that they need to change carriers and try to maximize their earning potential. It's like, oh, this carrier is paying 5 cents more than that carrier. But I think to really evaluate the opportunity, you got to look beyond the cents per mile. So let's say, for example, you have two companies, Company A and Company B. Company A pays 5 cents per mile less than Company B. However, Company A gives a lot of discounts. Discounts on labor, discount on parts, discounts on fuel, discounts on insurance. Mostly drop and hook. Um, they really try to pass on as much savings as possible to the driver. And they pay practical miles, not zip code to zip code miles. Some companies actually try to pay you less by how they pay you per mile. So then you go to company B, they pay 5 cents per mile, but you don't get any discounts. You pay full price for everything. Well, if you're going to pay full price, tires, fuel, maintenance, you know, insurance. Did you really make more money by going to company B, even though they're paying 5 cents more per mile? So this is where it's not just about money. I think you got to look at the whole picture. You got to look at what does company A have to offer versus company B. Maybe company A has a culture that the way they operate, they're nice to the drivers. And then company B, you know, they're assholes. They just ride them drivers into the ground. You can't stop for a 30-minute break without somebody calling you on the phone saying, "What are you doing?" So it's like, yeah, company B may pay more per mile, but you'll pay more for everything else, and they're not nice people. So you look at these two companies, so which company would you rather work for? For me, it would be company A. Because I think after a few years of being an owner operator, you're no longer motivated by just making money. There are other things you want to consider other than just how much per mile you're making. So a lot of times guys look at the spot market and they're like, oh, look at those rates, they're doing great. And I posted a link for the debt uh, van rate in the description box if you want to take a look at debt. um, if I were to leave Crete, for example, I don't think I would leave for anything less than somewhere in the neighborhood of 225 per mile. Somewhere between $2 per mile and 225 per mile. And right now, as of today, the spot rate is in some parts of the country a dollar 90 per mile. And you say, well, you're not getting $2 per mile at Crete. And I'm like, well, that's true. I'm not getting that at Crete. But I am getting discounts. And those discounts are worth something. They're not worth nothing. So I have to give credit where credit is due. It's like, um, if their company is giving discounts, you're gonna have to assign a value to that. You know, we got some from the United Kingdom. That's amazing. Hello, people. So, uh, let's see. You are in a green screen. Yeah, yeah. I'm using a green screen. You can pick any background you want when you use a green screen. So I go through my photo album and I pick out photos that I've taken before. This photo in the background right now is probably like in New Mexico, I would guess. So, but if you appreciate the discounts that the company is offering you, then you have to assign a dollar value to it. It's like if you don't use the discounts, then obviously they're worth nothing to you. But if you are using the discounts, then I think you need to give that some thought and just say, here's how much these discounts are worth to me. They may be worth $10,000 or $20,000 to your small business. If you get a fuel discount at your carrier like we do at Crete, okay, that's worth a lot of money. Fuel discounts are a huge part of why guys join a company. If you don't have any fuel discounts, then you could be paying, tens of thousands of dollars more just by purchasing fuel. So you look at that spot market and you think, wow, those guys on the spot market are doing great. But then, oftentimes guys try it and then they come back to the big box carrier because they realize that for the value is there at the carrier, that they may make less cents per mile, but they're getting all these discounts. So overall, they're better off being leased on with a big box carrier than being on their own, getting their own authority. So you got to remember, when you have your own authority and you're on a spot market, you have to lease or buy a dry van, a 53-foot dry van, and that could be 7% of your gross revenue right there. So and then you got to pay for your own insurance. See, when you're on with a big box carrier, it's their dry van, so you're not paying for the dry van. And then once you're hauling a load, you're under their insurance. The only thing you got to pay for is your bobtail insurance, which is like $36 per month. So it's very, very inexpensive to be on with a big box carrier. The other thing is with the spot market, you think, oh, they pay more, or you're thinking they pay more, but then you don't get as many miles. He's like, why wouldn't I get as many miles? It's like, well, because you're going to be sitting at a truck stop on the phone or on the computer trying to negotiate rate on a load. You'll spend half the day dealing with brokers rather than driving. Whereas a big box carrier like Crete, it's 80% drop and hook. So you're not wasting time talking to brokers or double brokering a load or anything like that. You just grab it and go. So that saves you a lot of time. And money is miles. So you hear these guys on the spot market, and granted, some of them are successful. There's no doubt about it. Not everybody struggles on the spot market. A lot of people do, but some people are successful. And they'll say, oh, you need to work smarter, not harder. I'm like, oh, okay, well, let's think about that. Are you getting any discounts? They're like, no. If they join NASTY, which is the National Association of Small Trucking Companies, they can get a fuel card, and they can get some fuel discounts through that. If they join OOIDA, they can get some discounts through group membership there. But they'll have to seek out the discounts and try to find them from different sources. But they're probably not as big of a discount as a big box carrier. So like at Crete, they have like 7,000 drivers. So when they get a fuel discount, and they give you a fuel solution, all the trucks in that area are going to that fuel stop to get fuel. Because for that day they're getting a big discount. It could be 50. I've seen it anywhere from 50 to 75 cents off per gallon of diesel. And if you had to pay for that full price on your own on the spot market, I mean, this is where being paid a higher rate with no discounts, you actually make less money than if you got paid a lower rate but you had discounts. So that's what you got to think about. And then I would say too that as time goes by, your priorities change. When you're early in your driving career, you're all about making money. You're all about getting as many miles as you possibly can. You wanted to get, at 130,000, 140,000 miles for the year. Well, things change. So 5 years down the road, your priorities change. Maybe you have money saved up and you got your debts paid off and you're not under the pressure. You're not under the gun anymore. It's like, look, I don't have to run all those miles to make ends meet. I can cut back on some of these miles, take better care of my health, spend more time at home. But you got to work to get there. If someone had told me right now, hey, you get paid more, but you got to drive more, I'd be like, no, that's all right. I'd rather take more time off. Keep the money, you know. Um, it sounds nice, but I don't want to drive myself into an early grave, for example. So, I think, money no longer motivates guys the more senior they become. You can imagine, 10 years as an owner operator, um, you're pretty smooth sailing at that point. You're not necessarily motivated to drive all those miles. In fact, at that point, you may be taking a month or 2 months off per year. Like when the weather is really, really bad and the storms are really coming through, and you're like, you know what, I'm just gonna get off the road. I'm just gonna take a month off, 2 months off. So then it's not about the money. At that point, it's not about the money. Yeah, you need to make a certain amount, but you're not gonna go out there and run the tires off the truck trying to make more money. There's other ways to make money, and that is you have your investments. For example, you have your IRA, your 401k, your individual brokerage account. This is money that you should be investing all along. And at some point, and I know it's hard to imagine, but at some point you'll have enough money in your investment accounts that your investments will actually be making more money than you will be earning. And it's like, okay, your money is making money because of the miracle of compound interest. So you don't have to work as hard. So we're not going to pursue, going from company to company to company because one company is offering 5 cents more per mile than the other company. If you are going to change companies or carriers, you really got to dig deep and look at those discounts and the benefits. Is it just about the cents per mile, or is it much more than that? A lot of guys don't take advantage of all the discounts available to them. They're already changing carriers, and they haven't even maximized the opportunity they had in front of them. It's like they got their blinders on. All they see is dollar signs. It's like, well, I think you got to look deeper than that. But they're under so much pressure to make money. They must be incredibly in debt, or have expenses through the roof you know, that all they care about is how much cents per mile they can get. You see these recruiting efforts. They're like sign-on bonuses. $1,000 sign-on bonus, $2,500 sign-on bonus. That's just to entice you to come on board. But if you look past those signing bonuses, you want to look at their overall program. You want to look at the benefits. If they got terrible benefits and you have high deductibles, and you know they don't offer you discounts, they're like, well, your hiring bonus means nothing. Because I'll be actually making less, not more. So these are things you have to think about. And I would say too, you really want to try to establish roots where you're at, because you will never have the opportunity to thrive. You'll never be able to flourish if you're constantly changing carriers. If you establish roots somewhere, then you'll get to know where you want. You get to know all the customers. You get to know the equipment. You get to know the mechanics. You get to know other drivers. And then you're very comfortable. So after a few years, your finances are stable. You've established roots in the community. You're going to be very fat and happy. You're not going to want to change carriers. A lot of times guys say, well, you've been a good driver. You've been driving for 10 years, safe driving record. And like, yeah, 1,000,000 miles. Okay. That's good. What would it take for you to change from company A to company B? And I'm like, I'll never do it. I'll never make that change. And it's like, but they're paying more. And I'm like, oh, I'm not motivated by money, so maybe if you would have caught me when I was only driving for 2 years, you might have been able to recruit me. But now that I've been here for 10 years, I'm not motivated by money. You would have to pay me astronomically to change carriers, and it's just not going to happen. You're not going to pay more than the market, you know, price for a driver. You just go find another driver. So I think that's a challenge when drivers are trying to recruit drivers, and they're like, you can't really recruit a senior driver from one carrier to another because they're not going to make that change. In that 5 cents per mile, they're just not going to make that change. Um, your best chance for recruiting other drivers is from a smaller carrier. So let's say you met a driver, say a truck stop or something, and he's driving for a mom and pop operation. And they got 20 drivers, and you point out all the benefits of them coming to a bigger carrier. Better insurance, better cents per mile, better benefits, all this stuff. Yeah, that makes sense. They'll change for that. They'll go from a small operation to a large operation, especially if they have a good driving record. Because that's the kind of opportunities that they're looking for. They're preparing themselves for bigger and better opportunities. But you can't get you can't get a senior company driver from Warner or Swift or Schneider to come to Crete. They just won't do it. And vice versa. Guys will not leave Crete to go to those other carriers. And why is that? Well, every carrier is a little bit different, but from an individual standpoint, they have no incentive to make that change. It's like, why would I want to change carriers? I'm perfectly happy where I'm at. So I think when guys think about changing carriers, they must imagine this utopian place to go work where it's the perfect company. It's like peaches and creams and unicorns, four-leaf clovers. The streets are paved with gold, and the reality is that's not true. The reality is you will find success, but you will have to put in the time. You'll have to drive the miles. You'll have to spend that time behind the steering wheel. There's no shortcuts. You can't go from starting out at the beginning of your career to becoming a millionaire at the end of your career. You can't make that. You can't make that time, shorter. You have to put in the time. You have to put in the work. You have to invest your money. So I think these guys who jump from carrier to carrier to carrier, you know, they're really kind of wasting their own time. You should find one good carrier, stay there. That would be my best advice. Find one. I don't care which one it is. I prefer Crete. Some guys prefer Schneider. Some guys prefer Landstar. Others like Mercer. But get there. Make the most of the opportunity. Take advantage of all the benefits. Look at everything they have to offer. Establish roots. And get some stability in your life. Don't be changing always. I mean, that's so unstable. You're constantly changing carriers. It's not worth it. It's just maximize the opportunity you have in front of you. You will find that as your savings improves and you pay off debt, you will be happy where you're at, no matter what carrier that's at. As long as it's a big box carrier, I think they're all pretty much the same. They have different colors, but they're probably very competitive in compensation and benefits. So, unless it's significant, I wouldn't make a change. Unless you're going from a small carrier to a big carrier, I wouldn't make a change. And I wouldn't necessarily go on that spot market. That's asking for trouble. You got to have deep pockets before you go on that spot market, because those rates go up and those rates come down. And you don't want to be in a situation where you took out a big truck loan and then them rates come down and you can no longer afford that truck. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the internet.